This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacada. We spent the majority of our time there talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend had been quite inebriated by the time we had to leave, therefore I'd be driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. The stretch of road we were on was surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it were unlit. But this was nothing to fear. I grew up in this area. I knew it like the back of my hand. There is a portion of the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forests. There are no lights. The only thing we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, cross the bridge, and uphill through more forest. It was as the highway started to flatten out that it happened. Something sprinted across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slammed on the brakes and turned to my girlfriend to ask her if she saw it too. She confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote, as they are fairly common in this area, but something felt off about it. Whatever it was that just ran in front of the car disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually just dart out in front of cars. Not like that, anyway. For some reason, I decided to check it out. I turned the car around and switch on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished in. I step out of the car and walk towards the woods. I don't see anything, but now it feels like I've perhaps made a grave error. My heart is pounding, and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention. I still don't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly, the car's horn blasts. It wasn't multiple horn beeps that you'd get if, say, your driver or passenger wanted you to hurry up and get back in the car. No, this was one long, blaring beep. I walk back into the car and ask my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction, and that's when I saw him. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud. In one of his hands, he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us and smiled. Then he waved just before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he initially vanished in, he circled back around and came out of another spot in the forest beyond my car's headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me with his hatchet raised as if he was making to strike me. We called the authorities once we got safely back home, but they never found anybody, or they just didn't tell us. But the officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting lone travelers for whatever reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back into that area recently, so I now drive that highway often. No naked hatchet man sightings yet, but I can tell you that I'm definitely extra vigilant now, especially near Deep Creek. I'm an elementary school teacher. Winter break just started, but before break, some of the kids were talking about presents and Santa. This got me thinking about when I stopped believing in Santa. Because when it comes to finding out that Santa Claus isn't real, I had a pretty uniquely terrifying experience. I loved Christmas. I mean, I still do, but as a child, I absolutely could not sleep on Christmas Eve. I tried to spy on Santa a million times. I'd wait for my parents to go to bed and try to sneak out. They'd catch me every time, except for 1 year. I was in 2nd grade, around 6 or 7 years old. I recall my best friend at school saying I needed to pretend to be asleep. Then my parents would go to sleep faster and sneaking out to meet Santa would be much easier. So Christmas Eve rolls around and I'm watching A Christmas Story with my family when my friend's advice comes back to my head. Pretend to be asleep. So that's what I did. Before the movie was even over, I started to act sleepy. I don't know how great my acting skills were, but they were good enough that my dad bought them and took me upstairs to my bed. When my dad left the room, I only waited a few moments, then I got out of bed and sat next to my bedroom door. I was listening for all the key indicators that the house was sleeping. It took a long time, so long in fact that I actually dozed off. But when I woke up, the house noises had subsided. I figured my parents had been in their room long enough and decided to make my move. I opened my door, slid out into the hallway, and began making my way to the living room. A combination of tiptoeing and sliding until I eventually reached the couch. I dove into the couch, lifted the curtains, and sat wrapped in a blanket, peering out the window for Santa. It was snowing, and I could have sworn I heard sleigh bells, but I wasn't seeing anyone. I had a gut-wrenching thought that maybe he'd already come. I squirmed out of the blankets and curtains to look behind me at the trees and stockings, but there was nothing. He hadn't arrived yet. As I maneuvered back under the curtains, I looked out the window again, and I was shocked to see the man himself, Santa. He was walking though, no sleigh, and no reindeer. But I wasn't going to be picky. It was Santa. I realized he was going to pass right by my house. He was looking all over the place, at all of the houses, in all of the windows. I wondered what he could be looking for. Then he stopped in his tracks and gave another good look to all of the houses. Then his eyes landed on me. He saw me, and I was ecstatic. I started waving excitedly, trying so hard not to squeal. He waved back, and then looked around before walking towards my window. As he approached, I noticed he had a bag with him. I assumed it was full of presents. When he reached the window, he said to me, "Do you want to come say hi to Santa, sweetie?" I shook my head yes, and he pointed to the front door. I left the window and walked over to the door, where there's another long window that reached the floor. I watched as Santa tried to open the door, but it was locked. I reached for the lock, unlocking the door, and he tried again. He still wasn't able to open the door. From the other side of the door, I heard him say, "You've just got to unlock the other lock, the one on the doorknob." So I tried to do what he told me, but for some reason, I couldn't quite grip the lock. My fingers kept slipping. Santa told me it was okay, and to just go to the back door, so I ran over and waited for him. He rounded the corner, and the light from the back deck turned on. He was fully illuminated. I remember thinking Santa was a lot younger than I thought he was, skinnier too. The light seemed to scare him. He almost ran away until he saw me standing there. Then he proceeded to hustle towards the door. He was motioning that I needed to be quick. He said he had something special for me, but then he had to go. He had leaned down and was reaching for something inside of his bag. I unlocked the sliding glass door and pushed my hands against the glass. I'll note that this door is hard to move if you try to open or close it at the wrong angle, but for a 7-year-old, it was nearly impossible. Santa had found what he was looking for in his bag, and just as he started to stand up, the door started to give way. As soon as it moved, the home was filled with the awful sound of alarms. I took my hands away from the door to plug my ears. I looked at Santa. He looked panicked. I noticed he was holding some sort of rope in one hand and a bag in the other. He dropped the bag and reached for the sliding door, and slid it open with no problem at all. He then reached for me. But before I could reach back or move or anything, I was swept up by my mom, and my dad kicked the man who I thought was Santa square in the chest, knocking him back several feet and landing him on his backside. That's all I saw before my mom rushed me to their bedroom. I don't remember crying, or even being terribly upset, or at least not until later. It was when my parents explained that the man who came to our house wasn't really Santa, and my dad kept saying things like, "She still thinks he's real, of course she tried to let the guy in," that I started crying. As far as what happened to the guy, he got away at first. He took off once he gained footing, but my dad didn't bother chasing him because he'd gotten the guy's wallet. The cops were on the phone and the guy left his bag behind. The bag wasn't filled with presents. My dad told me the bag was filled with more rope like the man had been holding. There was also duct tape, candy, miscellaneous tools like a hammer, lots of plastic bags, and miscellaneous clothes. Yeah, it was horrifying. But luckily he was picked up just a few minutes after he left our house. It's pretty hard not to spot the guy running around town dressed like Santa Claus. In the end, I forgave my parents for ruining the magic that is believing in Santa, because they did save my life. If you're enjoying this video so far, please leave a like and subscribe to help support the channel. Thank you. This happened in 2005 during a Christmas vacation. I moved away for college but came home to visit for the holidays. On my last night, my friend and I decided to go sledding at 3 a.m. We get in her car and drive to a hill, where we both sled down a few times. She gets ready to go again, but I stop her. She asked what's wrong, and I told her that I had a bad feeling. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I felt nervous. I told her we needed to leave now, so we drove back to my family home. The crime in my neighborhood was almost non-existent. All of the neighbors knew each other, and no one locked their doors at night. But when we got back, something told me to lock the doors behind me. I also checked all the windows and locked them too. My flight back to campus was only 4 hours away, and I decided to get some sleep. I slept for maybe 2 hours. When I woke up, I realized I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep, so I stepped outside. While outside, I looked at a huge pine tree we had in our front yard, when something caught my eye. What should have been pure fresh snow on the ground was littered with huge man-sized footprints. They wrapped around the tree and went towards the backyard. I was thinking maybe my uncle had been out there smoking or something. But that's when that feeling came back to me. The same feeling from when we were sledding. The anxious, paranoid feeling in the pit of my stomach. I looked to my left and I saw a man. He was running. No, he was sprinting straight towards me. He was probably close to 300 pounds and maybe 6 feet tall. And for his size, he was super fast. I froze in fear with the realization he's not just going for a morning jog. He's coming right at me. I tried to move several times, but I was frozen with fear. But then, at the last second, with everything in me, I opened my front door, slammed it shut, and locked it. I looked out the window and onto my porch, and the man was standing there trying to open the door. After unsuccessfully attempting to come in, he turns his head, and I follow his gaze to a man in a white van. The runner just threw up his hands and shook his head. He then walked to the van, got in, and they drove away. My heart was still pounding. I woke up my friend and made her walk around the house with me. There we found the footprints went to every door and every window around my house. She was too tired to rationalize it, but to me, I know if he had reached me, I wouldn't be writing this post. The malicious look on his face as he ran told me everything. This video contains some of the creepiest things caught on Ring doorbell footage. If you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy this one too.